All right, and we are live, and
Yay.
I don't think any of our conversation transferred over the air.
It was all appropriate. It was all appropriate. It's okay.
It was all appropriate. We were bemoaning the fact that our friends were going shopping without us to
I don't need
a crafty
more
store.
stuff.
I don't either. I've been
Done.
destashing big time this week, and I feel great. So I haven't just been destashing craft stuff, but that's going to be the last on my list. I'm trying the KonMari method. So
Yes.
yeah, we'll see. We'll see how my latest kick goes. She goes, your mother's on a kick, leave her alone. He happens to like this kick.
Just let it be, kids. Just let it be.
We are going to paint a mountainy kind of mountain where the mountains meet the sea. It's a beautiful photograph from Sandy Bell on Paint My Photo, and I have a link in the video description. If you're not a member of Paint My Photo, it's free to join. It's just a place where photographers share photographs and artists paint from them and can share their paintings. And I'm going to be good about this and post this after the live show. I'm always really bad. I get kind of stuck in this. I always get hung up, it seems like, after the show and things don't get done. So I apologize for other pictures I haven't put up there, but that's where this is from. And we are going to use a few colors. We've got, and if you don't have turquoise, you can water down your phthalo blue more. I think this is kind of a nice color to have simply because it has a little bit more opacity, and it's going to, it's kind of nice to control in certain depths of the water where you have that, oh, Chewy's licking my elbow again, where you have that kind of quality, but obviously you can water down phthalo blue. They're very similar color. We're also going to use ultramarine, and we are going to use any cool red you have. You can use quinacridone rose. You could even use alizarin crimson, any sort of like red that leans more towards violet, burnt sienna, or you can use burnt umber. And in fact, you know what? I'm going to say let's use burnt umber instead of burnt sienna, unless your burnt sienna isn't quite as red as this. This one is, I refilled my burnt sienna pan, and I just used whatever tube I had on hand, and it's a little redder than the burnt sienna that originally came in the Turner kit. So I recommend either using a burnt sienna that's not quite so red, because we do have a quin rose we can redden it up with if we need to. Use one that's a little more neutral, and yellow ochre. And most of these colors I'm using are the Turner watercolors from jerrysartorama.com. They are our sponsor. I've linked up all the supplies that I'm using in the video description. Actually, I think I forgot to link up the Mimic brushes. These are the, this is a Creative Mark Mimic Synthetic Squirrel. So very wonderful absorbent brushes, come to a great point, and I really enjoy using them. We're going to start. I put just a little line sketch on here to just help me be a little quicker. You don't really have to sketch anything. This is going to be a pretty easy painting to do. And I think I'm going to start off with a nice big brush. I like big brushes, and I cannot lie. I'm going to wet the sky area here, just the top of it. And I'm going to make a mix for the sky. By the way, I'm working on Arches Rough. You can work on a cold press paper or a rough paper. This is going to look a little nicer. This sketch I did here was just on my cheapo Aqua Bee 90-pound stuff I usually just sketch on. And I think the quality of a good quality cotton rough paper is really going to enhance a simple landscape. So I'm going to grab some ultramarine. I need to refill my ultramarine here. I'll slide my palette over a little bit so you can see. Some ultramarine here, but the ultramarine on its own just isn't quite purple enough for this guy, so I'm going to add just a smidgen of some rose in here. Not much. See, it's almost turning this into a French ultramarine. If you have a French ultramarine and it seems to lean a little more purpley, then just go ahead and use that. You have to use your own judgment. If you pull up that photo from Paint My Photo, you'll kind of see what I mean. And I'm just going to kind of pull this down. I would say it's probably, maybe 1/8 of the way down. And I'm leaving this kind of rough edge because this is a very distinct line of clouds in the photo I'm going from, and I want to keep that. And instead of blotting it away, I think it'd be nice just to kind of keep that. And look at the quality there. If you look at the edge of the paper where the paint meets it, that sparkly line, that's the roughness of the paper you're seeing, and it's a quality that you're not going to get on a smoother paper. So if you have a handmade paper, this would be a fantastic project to use that with. Now I want to make this a little bit more gray, so I'm going to grab some burnt umber, or you can use burnt sienna, either way, just a little touch of that. I don't want it super gray, but I do want to knock down the blue there. And I'm going to put some shadows. I'm actually going to blot my brush a little bit. That looks a little too blue to me. Maybe even a little smidgen more of the rose. And I am going to just kind of tap in some shadows that I see on the reference photo.
On our screen, Lindsay, you can see where you're mixing, but you can't see the colors. You can just see the mixing part of the palette. You just slide it over a little bit.
So we have
now the videos for there we go.
There we go.
Pop back.
So I'd use the ultramarine blue mostly, a smidgen of burnt umber, and a smidgen of the rose to get this gray. I don't know if I'll be able to. I wonder if I can see how much I can get in there. Oh yeah, I can get quite a bit in there and keep it all in. I had to do a different setup. I had the crazy haunted camera this week. It was awful. I was trying to film, and I would film, and the camera would just keep moving, and it was like this auto pan of mine. And then before I knew it, I was looking into the kitchen. It was like, oh, it was so aggravating. And I finally fixed it, but I'm like, I am not moving that. So I go downstairs and steal some clamps from Jason's work area and find another selfie stick to hook up my my webcam. So I'm like, I am not moving that sucker until I move back down cellar because that the ghost camera must be stopped.
I will not bow to the ghost camera.
Yeah. Now I'm just cleaning my brush, dabbing off the excess, and I'm fading out the shadow in certain spots because I don't want it really distinct. And ultramarine blue and burnt umber or burnt sienna, whichever you're using, will lift and fade. The rose is a little bit more of a staining color, but you can fade out quite a bit of that. But I do want that nice crisp white edge because the sun's higher in the sky. It's going to be lighting up the top of those clouds a little bit more. And I'm also going to bring that color right down to the mountain line. Now, if you don't have a sketch on, you can bring that that gray you can bring it down a little bit. I won't bring it all the way down because we do have some snow to contend with, but you don't have to worry about this so much because the mountain line is going to be a little bit darker, well, quite a bit darker than this shadow on the cloud. So it's not really going to show if you end up having a little extra there. And if you like a more colorful sky, I've got some glare. I'm just going to tip that up a little bit because I feel like it's glaring a little bit with the light behind it. I want to make sure you can see those colors. It always seems to glare a lot more until I get a lot of color on. I want to take a little bit of the rose actually and add that into my clouds over here because I know I'm going to have some of that reflecting in the water. And I feel like it just needs a little bit more reason to be there. So that's just going to help with that. Grabbing a little more ultramarine too. Any place you have a hard edge, if you want to just wet the area and drip in a little more paint, you can do that as well. And it's going to give you a softer shadow there. And if you get too much, then you can grab your paper towel and you can blot it. There's nothing wrong with that. I do want to kind of skip this area right here now because I want to make sure that's dry before I put in those mountains because they are a little crisp. They're not, if I go into the darker mountains now, it's going to just wick into the sky. Put a little tone onto the snow, not a ton, but I'm going to grab a little bit of that rose. I'm putting it right on my palette. I just have a little bit in there on the corner of my palette there. I really want it very, very weak. So it's just a very, very faint. You can hardly see it. Almost just looks like I have a dirty brush basically. And I'm going to put that on my snow and it's going to even dry lighter than this. And the reason I'm doing this now instead of after, I don't want to have to, I can actually paint over all of this. I don't want to have to try to paint around rocks and stuff. So I'm just going to get that all in there right now. And if you have any questions, go ahead and type the word question in all caps and Sarah will relay it or the moderators will help you out.
Michelle King, how do you know when to use rough versus cold press or hot press?
Well, I find that rough paper is great on landscapes because especially if you have something where you've got rocks or other textural elements, it's also really nice to use when you're doing a very almost simplified piece because it gives you an extra point of interest that that might be lacking. Like when I show you, obviously this is a very quick sketch, but when I show you the sketch compared to the finished painting here, you're just going to notice that the supply, the actual paper does not, this paper makes an impact where this really doesn't. It's one of those situations where the supply does really play an important role in the outcome of the project. A lot of people will kind of use the quality of supplies almost as a crutch and think, well, I'm not going to bother if I don't have the best of this or that. But in this case, the supply is going to make a huge difference. I'm going to dry this real quick so I can go into the water without worrying about mixing into any of my snow. So I'll take a few questions while that's drying. If we have any. Good.
We're good right now.
Oh, good.
Someone asked about the size of this brush, but Jen and Sandra and Val, I think all
oh, great.
got in there.
This is one of my favorites, the Mighty number 30 round. I used to always do my skies with a flat, kind of like this one here. But round brushes, they have more bristles, they hold more water, and I've just preferred to use those ever since I got this number 30. And I just love it. It comes to a tiny point, so I could really do an entire painting with it if I wanted to. So I find round brushes are just so much more versatile. If you can only choose one, you're better off to get one really nice, like number 12 round or number 8 round, than a whole set of a variety pack of cheaper brushes. There, that's pretty dry. Okay, so the water, we're actually going to paint, wet on dry for the water, because we're going to use a juicy brush. It's going to hold plenty of paint and water. We're going to have quite a watery mix, so I don't want to have extra water on the paper. There's also several different segments of color in this water, and I don't want them to just all flow together uncontrollably. The other thing about working on 100% cotton paper like this Arches is, and by the way, it's actually pronounced Arch, but the American, we pretty much, all of us in America pretty much pronounce it Arches.
Well, that's how it's spelled.
Well, yeah, and I want people to know what I'm talking about. It's fancy. So I'm going to go in here where there's kind of like a patch of turquoise. I'll put that in. But when you're working on 100% cotton paper, it's absorbent, but it doesn't, it's kind of funny because it doesn't dry as quickly. This is also a very heavily sized paper, so it helps the paint kind of stay wetter longer and helps it stay on the surface, so you can manipulate it a little bit more, which is really nice. So now I'm going to grab a little bit of ultramarine, and you might look at this, the reference photo, and say, geez, it just looks blue. I can't discern those colors. You will learn to discern those colors the more you paint. It's just something that comes with the practice. I mean, some people might have a difficult time if you have any color blindness, but you can definitely discern the tones if you squint at the picture and see what's lighter and what's darker. So if you're having a hard time discerning the color, you can stick with one color and just go by the tones, and it will still be lovely. And you can let your paint drag, kind of like I'm just letting my brush drag. Because this paper is so rough, you'll get that sparkle. See how it kind of looks like the light glistening off? And that's a really nice, especially over here where we've got some kind of snow being reflected from the sky. So I'm just like using the edge of my brush and kind of going for that, getting that sparkle effect. Now, rough paper can wear down your brushes. So I don't use it all the time. So that's the one caveat to using rough paper. Just kind of keep that in mind. Like I wouldn't fuss around on, I love it with a big brush on a landscape, but I wouldn't fuss around with it too much with like a small brush. Adding a little bit of rose to this. I wouldn't fuss around with it with a small brush because you could wear that brush down pretty quickly and lose its point. Now that's a little too dark, so I'm going to clean my brush off, blot it so that my brush is drier than the paper, and just kind of brush over that. Hopefully I can avoid getting a bloom that way. Work it back a little bit to try to minimize that. I'm going to dip into the rose a little bit more on its own, but you do need this. Pretty much everything we're using is pretty watery because we're going right on the dry paper, so we're not going to have as much shift. And I'm using the side of my brush more than the tip, which is a little different than how I usually work. Now we're moving into staining colors. So what we start doing now is not going to be able to be lifted off very easily. I'm adding some phthalo blue to my mix here. Phthalo blue is a very staining color, whereas turquoise is not as staining. It's going to be able to lift up a little bit more, this particular pigment anyway that I'm using. So it's kind of nice to start with those liftable colors in case we have any errors, and then work our way over to the staining ones. I'm lightening up some areas where I know I'm going to have some cloud reflections. And I'm going to see if I can blot out just a little bit of cloud in here. And then in this corner, I want to get some yellow ochre because you can start to see the sand. Always mix it out on your palette though, so you don't end up with an unintentional blob.
Michelle King, why is it important to know pigment numbers and information?
Well, if you want to replace a color, like if you don't have the color I have, but you know the pigment numbers that it's made out of, then you can replace it with a little more confidence. You also will learn that some pigments are more resistant to fading than others, so it can help you purchase reliable pigments. Also, a lot of times companies will come out with cutesy names for their products, and you might say, oh, that looks great, that, you know, beautiful blue looks beautiful, looks wonderful, I'm gonna go buy that. But then when you read the pigment information, you realize it's the same color as the ultramarine you already have. You know, it just helps you become a more informed consumer. I think it's nice to learn, but if you're not interested in learning about it, you don't have to. You can still enjoy painting without knowing. With watercolors being a little bit more delicate than other types of paint, just as how they fade and stuff, it is nice to know just to avoid fugitive colors. I need to deepen this up a little bit more, so I'm going to go with more burnt umber and yellow ochre right there, just in the corner. Oops, I grabbed some burnt sienna by mistake. I need to remix. And the paper's still wet, so you do have a little bit more time to blend and to work an area with the cotton papers too, so especially heavily sized ones.
Amber Williams, how do you suggest a beginner start learning about color theory to help our painting? Green red hue versus green blue hue. I think she means warm versus cool colors.
Mixing and painting, that's the reading about it is not going to give you the experience that you need to learn mixing. You just gotta mix. There's a great class on Craftsy. If you click down the video description, there is a link to Craftsy there to my class. But once you're there, there's a class that's called Luminous Color Mixing, I believe. It's a watercolor mixing, and they use the Daniel Smith Essentials set, which is a fantastic set for learning color theory. And they go through many different mixing recipes. I would highly recommend that class. I can't remember the instructor's name right off the top of my head, but she is she's really good at breaking it down and teaching you how to make your color charts and basically how to mix whatever you want from those 6 colors.
Alexandra Manga, is there any book resource you'd recommend a novice to help practice with watercolor?
Yes, there's a couple I'd recommend. One is the Watercolorist Essential Notebook, and that's published by Northlight Books, I believe. The other one is Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Watercolor, which is out of print, but you can find copies on like Amazon and eBay. But that's my favorite. Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Watercolor is my favorite. You might even be able to get it from your library. I checked it out from my library years ago, and then I went and ordered a copy.
Kendall McCauley, I finally bought a tube of M. Graham. What a difference from Cotman. I need to develop my stash a tube at a time. I bought Quinn Rose. Would you go ultramarine blue or burnt sienna next?
Probably ultramarine blue, because burnt sienna is a neutral. You can approximate that with a mix once you have your primaries. It's a very useful color to have.
Chewy's got a sticker. Piece of tape on her eyebrow.
Oh no.
Sorry, Chewy.
But yeah, I'd always go with your brighter, more saturated colors first, because you can always mix your less saturated colors. So what I did there, that was burnt umber, a smidgen of yellow ochre, and a very light wash. And then for texture, I went with my paper towel and gently dabbed it, because these are kind of some rock formations. And then I think I'm going to switch to a smaller brush just because it's going to be less thirsty. And I'm going to put some of those reflections in the water right now from these two rock formations. I'm going to get a little burnt sienna and ultramarine blue together just to darken it a little bit, because I know I'm going to have to add that there. And all I have is a little bit of diluted paint here. If I go in with a really wet brush, if there's any moisture left on that paper, it's going to give me blooms, and I don't want that. So I'm just dragging this fairly dry brush across this the paper that may not be all the way dry yet. So you just that's one of those things you learn, how to control the flow of your paint and where your paint goes. And if it makes you uncomfortable to do this, you can let it dry and then go back in afterwards. Get a little more paint on there. So now I want to have a few sharper lines. So I'm going to have a slightly wetter brush, but I'm still going to blot it before I bring it to paper, just because I don't want to have blooms. Just going to drag out some of my ripples. I love the sparkle that you get with rough paper. There's no duplication for that with other surfaces.
Shared RD61. I apologize, I butchered that. I recently started painting and I'm having trouble with water blooms. What exactly causes the colors to bloom and how do I avoid them?
You avoid it by drying between layers, because the blooms happen when you have a layer of paper that's not fully, you have a layer of paint on your paper that's not fully dry, but it's semi-dry. And when you release a drop of water, what it does is it lands on that wet paper and it pushes all the pigment out. And then you've got this really wet puddle, and you've got this, you've got the pigments pushed up against the semi-dry puddle, and that's on the edges of that wet puddle is where all that pigment's going to collect and dry in a hard, like cauliflower shape. So if you want to avoid that, you simply let your layers dry in between, or like you paint everything while it's still damp, and then you don't touch it until you're until it's all dry. It usually happens when you're fussing around with stuff, or if you have a lot of puddles. If you have your paper too wet and you got puddles sitting on your paper, if that's the case that you're having, that's also a very easy fix. What you want to do is take your brush after you've done your wash and you see that you have a puddle, you dry it with a paper towel, just dry it really good. Then you lay it down into that puddle and let it soak up, drink up all that extra water, and then you won't have a puddle. All right. Now I'm going to go to the mountains in the back, and I'm going to switch to a small flat synthetic brush because it's going to give me the shape of the rock formations that I need. This just happens to be like a kid's one. This is actually from Fab Art, just a little kid's brush. And I'm going to mix up kind of like a deep, almost like navyish purple color. I'm going to use some phthalo blue. I'm also going to use some ultramarine because I have so much ultramarine in this picture that I want to kind of cross-pollinate those colors. I'm going to grab some rose, quinacridone rose, or whatever red you've been using. It's going to make it very purpley. And I need to desaturate this color a little bit, which means I need to bring down the brightness on it. So I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber to that to desaturate. I could also have added yellow ochre to desaturate, but if I did that, it's going to look a little more muddy. This is just going to kind of kick down the saturation. And by using this brush to also apply, it's going to give me those raggedy, sharp edges that I want. Add a little more water that's a little darker than what I want. And I'm just kind of almost using like a, not really calligraphy style, but I just want to kind of leave little bits of white, which would be snow. And just kind of get these, the dark here that we're painting, it would be the rocks that you can see kind of peeking out between the snow.
Beth Crawford, which brand of opera rose do you recommend?
You know, that's actually a color I don't recommend because it's, unless you're using it in a sketchbook, because it will, it'll change and it will turn more into a darker, like a quinacridone rose. So I would just go ahead and get the quinacridone rose. And unless you're working in a sketchbook or your work's going to be reproduced, but it's very fugitive because of the fluorescent dye that it has in it. So I do have a tube of Winsor Newton opera. It's beautiful. I think most of them are lovely. It's just that none of them are permanent. Now I'm going to add, oh wait, I go one more real dark area. Then I'm going to add some water to my mix and make a paler color for the mountains that are on either side that actually are back in the distance a little bit more, kind of like within the clouds. And you can put more like bits of snow or fewer, it's up to you. I have heard the Holbein opera rose is really nice. Man, I just pooped on their opera rose party. I feel bad about that. Such a party pooper.
You are. You know what it is? It's because you've been in the cleaning out and getting rid of stuff. Less is more.
I did add a little bit of blue to that mix. I need to add more water to it though. It's still darker than what I want. When you're painting on dry paper, you will notice less of a shift when it dries. So just keep that in mind. It's not going to fade out as much as you're used to. Now, if you decide you want to adjust something, you've got that too light. What you can do is just, since that is wet right now, you can drop in some of the color you've mixed. Just watch out for puddles, and you can drop it in until you get it to the color that you want. I like to add pigment to the bottom of something like this to give it some visual weight.
Cindy B, does the inclusion of the fluorescent dye always mean the color will be unstable?
Pretty much, yeah. Those little molecules buzzing around, and exciting your eyeballs, they eventually get tired and no longer buzz. That's sciencey.
that's sciencey talk right
I think
there.
it's something like that, though. I think that's what happens. I think the molecules are all buzzing around, and the ones that burn brightest fade quickest, burn out quickest.
I dislike fluorescent lighting.
Ugh.
I'm glad I don't have to work under fluorescent lighting anymore. It was awful.
I like the fluorescent lights for the CFLs, the daylight balanced ones. I use those downstairs a lot because they don't burn out as much and they're better for filming. But yeah, I know what you mean.
You know, when you go into a store, like,
oh yeah,
you go into this, they have those giant, awful. Ugh.
And in dressing rooms, I mean, come on. If I owned a store, I would put like the most flattering light bulbs in the dressing rooms.
And those mirrors are just awful. The mirrors are never any good.
Nobody wants to see themselves from that angle, the angle of the dressing room mirror.
Nobody wants to be circled by themselves. It's just uncomfortable.
Right. Just you can blot it for a little texture if you want to. And that gives us a nice bit of depth, I think. Now we can work on the rock formations. We're going to mix up a nice dark color. And I'm actually really liking this simple little brush here because it's a nice sharp edge. I'm going to use my burnt umber. I do recommend you get like a heavier, if you're going to be painting a lot with it. These are great for kids. They're meant to like not roll and not be too heavy. But I think for an adult, having a wooden handle or an acrylic handle, something with a little more weight on it, for painting for a long time is going to feel a lot better in your hand. Just to give you a heads up, but the quality of these bristles are nice here. So what I'm doing here with my dark, this is the a nice gray mixed with burnt umber or burnt sienna, you can use either. And my ultramarine, I am going to put some kind of choppy marks in these rock formations. They're kind of like, they could be shadows, they could be, cracks in the rock. Just want to get some visual interest in here. I'm also going to be mixing a really muted green that will be dabbing onto some of these areas for just some like evergreen foliage. It's still growing. So I don't want to cover up all of my kind of the bleached areas where the bare rock is. Just want to get, and you can see you can kind of get like a really nice sharp line with the chisel edge of that brush. You could totally do this with a round brush. I think that sometimes if we use a round brush too much though, we can end up with very samey lines. Samey, you know, because like all your lines look the same.
Mm-hmm,
you know, you're kind of forced to get a really razor sharp line like this, and then you can turn it to get a broader line, which you can do with a round brush. But I just think for like rocks, because they are kind of angular, hard objects, it just is nicer to paint them with a brush that mimics that shape a little bit better. It forces us to use different brush strokes. Another wonderful artist on YouTube, Angela Fair, she shared some photos on her Facebook, I think it was her Facebook page. Anyways, she does these workshops up in Canada, and there's this one place that she photographed that was just gorgeous, and I could not believe the color of the water. It looked like it was like in this quarry. I'm thinking it was Jasper, Canada, maybe. And the water was just like this green, this like tealy green color. It was so unusual. And that's kind of what this water reminds me of here, where it's so unusual to see it in such an you know, tundra, like icy tundra place. She does a lot of landscape. She's has more of an abstract style, but she's definitely worth checking out. Very friendly, nice woman. She also did a craftsy class. That's how I got to meet her. Again, there'll be some foliage here, so I'm not going too crazy with the dark, because I know I'm going to put some of that dark mixed green in there. And I just realized this needs to be kind of that shade, so we'll return to that in a minute. Okay, let's do that right now. We still got color on our palette. Hopefully we have enough for that. If not, we'll have to mix up a little bit more. If you paint with a real dry brush, you can let it kind of skip, and you can get some interesting textures that way. I do need a little bit more. So remember, we used the phthalo, the ultramarine, a little bit of rose, a little more rose than that, and a smidgen of burnt umber. A little more rose. That's not quite. Let's try that. That's a little better. And that addition of extra rose, and the fact that it's a little crisper and darker, it makes it come forward a little bit. It's not as fuzzy as the stuff in back, and the warmth from the red makes it kind of come towards our eyes a little bit more as well. I think there's probably trees up there, so I'm just going to kind of tap my brush on the edge to make it look like there might be some treetops. Bring that up a little higher.
Gracie Shack. Hi, Lindsay. I like my Prismacolor pencils, but they keep breaking. What brand of colored pencils do you recommend?
If you like the style of Prismacolors, Colorsoft is very similar, like the same like soft waxy lead, with less likely to break. I'm going to tap that just to tone it down a little bit. Okay, now even though this is snow and we painted like some rosy purple colors, it appears to our eyes to be white. So that's kind of why you want to have that in there. We still, because the lightest part of our picture is like the reflections in the water, this little highlight on the top of the clouds. So we want to have that contrast in there. If you got this too dark, you could always try lifting out, or even use like a pastel, like a chalk pastel, and you could bring it out more that way. So that's a nice option for you if that happened. Now I want to make a really dull green. None of these colors we have are going to make a bright green. I'm going to start with yellow ochre. That's the yellow that we've been working with. And I'm going to add some phthalo blue to it because that's our greenest blue. That's even dark. That's even brighter than I was expecting. I'm going to tap it in and see how it looks. I might need to add. I'm going to see how this looks first. If I need to tone it down, I will tone it down later, but it's easy to tone down a color and it's tough to brighten it up or increase the saturation of it, I mean. So we can always lift it off to lighten it, but it's tough to increase the saturation. So I'm going to go in and put this brighter color first. And if I want to go over it later, I can. I think I probably will end up putting some ultramarine on top, but I just want to get this in here.
Katrina Noel, what is the sizing of paper and how does it change your artwork?
The sizing is the amount of glue that's been added internally and externally to the paper to hasten the paint from absorbing into it. So a paper lot of sizing has usually sizing basically mixed in the batch. Like paper is made well, this paper is made by kind of grinding up a bunch of cotton rags and blending them into a slurry, and then they pour them over a screen and mold and make the paper. And so before they do that, they mix some glue. It's kind of like a glue into the batch, and that just makes it kind of coats all the fibers so that paint isn't going to soak right in. Like if you put paint on a cotton ball or a paper towel, it soaks right in. And that's not what you want with your watercolor paper. Otherwise, all your edges will be feathery and blobby, and you wouldn't get crisp lines. And then after that, after they make the paper and they let it dry, they coat the outside with another layer of sizing. So that's called external sizing. And when they mix it in the big blender, that's called internal sizing. And the more sizing your paper has, the more it's going to resist absorption. And how, and different paper manufacturers have different levels, and so you can choose when you find a paper that you like. It's probably has a lot to do with the sizing they're using. Sizing can be synthetic or it can be gelatin.
Gelatin. I lie. I don't like gelatin. I don't eat Jell-O. Unless it's a Jell-O shot. I have been known to eat a few of those in my life.
Before the show, even.
No, I'm good. I don't have I stayed good and sober before the show.
I did decide to add a little bit of ultramarine into my green and dab that on some of these because they're just a little bit too bright. And I can twist my brush and use the corners to give it more of like a spiky look. The nice thing about a synthetic brush when you're just trying to adjust is that you're not going to be picking up too much paint and too much water. So the chances of the brush kind of just letting loose a bunch of water when you're not expecting it is slim. You'd have to be bring your really wet brush over really fast to have that happen.
Michelle King, I bought some cheap watercolors and some colors pull apart when it dries, and it dries as specks instead of a wash. Do you know why that happens or how to fix it?
Oh, that's interesting. It pulls apart in the water. It must have a lot of filler in it or something. I haven't really run into that problem that much. It could be that the paint wasn't milled very finely. You might get like a palette if your paints are in pans or something. Get a palette, bring it onto your palette, mix it up really good, maybe with a stiffer brush. It's kind of a pain, but if you get it good and incorporated, when you bring it over to your paper, it should separate less. Or use a little less water with it. Sometimes if they have a lot of chalky fillers, they'll get that kind of separation or kind of like a faux granulation on your paper. Okay, so I'm feeling like the snow in here does need a little bit more definition here and there. So I am going to mix up, grab a little bit of the rose, add it to some of my purpley mix from the mountains, add a little more water, actually take it to a fresh spot so I can really dilute it down. And I'm going to add some Oh, I'm gonna dry my brush. I had too much water in there. I'm gonna add just some very, very faint snow lines, especially at the base of some of these rock formations where I think there'd be a little bit of a shadow.
Rebecca Viticolino, Italian, sorry. It's an Italian last name. I think I butchered it. Vitagliano. I know you don't use black in watercolor, so how do you figure out what colors to exchange it for?
You mix your opposites. So you could do red and green. You can do blue and orange or blue and brown. Any two opposites will make a nice neutral. So you want to pick something that you've already used and mix from that, and that will give you a very nice neutral color. Like here, I like to use ultramarine blue and burnt umber or burnt sienna. Burnt sienna is a very orange color, so it does give us a really nice gray or black that way. You can, I mean, there's no reason you can't use black. It's just oftentimes, or pretty much all the time, unless you're using it for like an illustration purpose, it tends to make things look very dead. Just because it's the black pigment itself, if it's the only place that pigment is showing up, it tends to look really fake. It doesn't seem to be much of a problem in illustration, I think, because it's reproduced. And then when the work is reproduced, they will use like the ink from their machines. They're using the same like ink cartridges, and so those colors do get mixed. I think that's why it looks fine when reproduced, but it looks weird if you're trying to do a painting.
Danielle Morales. I really enjoy your live classes, and my question is, what do you think about Mission Gold watercolor? I saw your review, but I want to know a more specific opinion.
You know, I really like it, and I got the pure pigment set, and then they actually enjoyed my review and sent me one of their sellers sent me their perfect pan set, and I've actually used the perfect pan set more. I really liked their pan watercolors. I like the regular watercolors too, for whatever reason. I think because it was in a palette and really convenient, I used their pans more. The only color that, some of the color names are a little different than what we would expect from like, I think they're like, cobalt blue wasn't like what I expect when I get a cobalt blue, and the burnt sienna isn't what I expect when I get a burnt sienna. The burnt sienna is very strange. I didn't care for that so much. It mixes very green. Like if I mix it with like if I tried to make my brown with burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, I get like a greenish color. So other than that, I really like them. I don't know if you necessarily need to get the more expensive pure pigment set either, because I know they had a set that came with a palette, 36 colors. Some were single pigment, some were mixed, and I've seen some very beautiful work done with that. I don't have that set, but yeah, I like it. I just have so much, and this is part of my issue right now where I'm doing like a massive cleanup. I have so many sets of paints that, I mean, I could rotate them every day, and it probably would be a month before I got back to, you know, and I'm not, and that's not the way, I mean, because it's my business, I guess I justify it a little bit, but it's excessive. And because of that, I don't get to use all of my things as much as I would like to. Now I'm thinking I need to get a little bit darker in the water here, and I kind of want some juicy swashes of color. So I've mixed up my phthalo blue, and I mixed up some ultramarine. I'll just show you what I've done. It's nothing too fancy, just kind of watery. I just want you to see the consistency there. And I'm going to glaze a little bit. I am going to zap this with a heat tool. It should be dry, but just to be safe, it feels a little cool to the back of my hand. So I just want to be safe, and I'm going to go in and add some glazing to parts of the water here.
Lisa Burke, a book or reference suggestion for painting buildings perspective. Mine always look wonky.
Geez, I don't really have any books on perspective personally that I could recommend, but I know Liz Steele just released a book. If you like the urban sketching style, she has got a new book out. I really enjoy her blog. Go check out her blog. I think it's just lizsteele.com. She's an Australian painter. See if you like her work, and if so, consider her book. I think that would give you some good advice. her work is, you know, very urban sketchy. So it's not like, it's not super realistic. I mean, you definitely see it's a building. She's very talented. I don't mean it's not realistic in any sort of dig at all. I love her work. But it's definitely, a lot of it's sketched on location. So, you know, she's not sitting there with a ruler and a T-square or anything. That's the only thing that's coming to mind, because I don't do very much architecture. But if anybody else has an idea and wants to leave it in either the chat or the comments after the video goes up on YouTube, the recording, that would be great, because I really can't think of anything. Can you, Sarah, do you have any suggestions?
We never learned, like, when I took some classes, graphic design stuff, it was like you just kind of put a point, you know, like a third of the way down in your paper, and that's your sight line.
Vanishing point?
Yes, thank you. And I don't know, but again, because we did it on computers, it was a lot easier, because you could just connect stuff to that vanishing point and then it would all come out correctly.
Interesting. I would think it'd be harder on a computer than
no, because once you figure out where your point is, you can keep that point there and then connect all your lines to that point. So when your design's all done, it actually is all lined up quite nicely. And you can also cheat and do it on one side and then copy, paste, and flip it, reverse it to do it on the other side. And it'll line itself up perfectly. Oh, nice. Deborah Aceta bought Fabriano paper. It feels very smooth. Am I supposed to use wet on wet or dry?
You can use whatever you want. You might have, Fabriano does run a little smoother. They have a couple different, I think they're the only company that offers soft press, which is like a cross between cold press and hot press. So they actually, I think they still offer that. So it's a fairly smooth, paper. I think it's, yeah, I think their paper is great. I use it quite a bit. You can use any technique, really. I often will start with a wet on wet, let it dry, then build up layers. I'm flicking here because I should have put a paper down to protect the rest of that, but I wanted a little texture of the pebbles kind of under the water there. I'm just going to blot the stuff in the background off. But yeah, I mean, you don't, a lot of times when you're working with a smooth paper, wet on wet will give you blooms, but still people use it, especially for their first washes, a lot. All right, I need to tip this up a little bit to look at it and see what this needs. Let's see. I think I need a little bit more contrast between the mountains and my rocks. And actually looking at a reference photo, my rocks are darker. So I am going to do a little glazing. And so if you look at a photo and you squint, a lot of times you can tell what's darker, because sometimes it looks like everything's about the same, but then when you look at it and you squint, you can say, you know, that's really a little darker. I'm adding a little bit of ultramarine and burnt sienna, making a fairly loose wash because I'm just going to glaze. And I'm going to glaze over just a few of these rock areas. I really like that one. I want to leave that one alone. So I just want to get these ones that are kind of further back on the visual plane. And I can always add another glaze if this one doesn't do the trick.
Sherry W., when you're finished, could you please show the pictures, both papers, so we can see the comparison?
I can't show you the photo. You have to go to Paint My Photo because that's part of the agreement. You can use the photos for your art, but you can't show the photos without permission from the photographer. So I can only do that if it's like a graphic stock or a Pixabay photo. Besides, comparison is a thief of joy.
That's right.
All right. I still feel like I need a little bit more happening in there. I feel like I need a little more contrast, so I'm going to mix up another dark. I'm going to add a little phthalo blue to my dark, though, this time. Phthalo blue, ultramarine, and burnt umber here. Nice dark brown. I feel like these rocks kind of need a little bit of weight on the bottom of them, so I'm kind of just adding a little bit of that. If the rocks are wet, the color can just drip up into them. Can even add just some rocks on their own peeking out from the snow. Sometimes it's hard to know when you're finished when you're doing a very simple landscape because you kind of just, I don't know. And it's probably just my whole personality. I always want to add more. That's probably why I have such a hard time decluttering, because it's like, more is better, more is good. I like more. And I feel like I kind of want some of that over here too. Water it down a little bit though. I do want it to flow off my brush. And again, I'm not using these smaller brushes too much. This is a number 8, but it's got such a nice point. I'm really afraid that it might wear down on this paper if I do it too much. So I'm just going to be I'm kind of thinking of an economy of brush strokes. Like I don't want to use too many, especially, I try to think of that anyway, but especially when I'm using a nice sharp brush on a rough paper, because it is kind of like a sandpapery feeling to it.
Sherry W., I meant the 2 you painted yourself.
Oh,
so
yes.
You can see how the 2 papers react differently.
Oh, yes, I will. I'm sorry, Sherry. I thought
she meant the original image too. So now that we understand the question, yes, we can show you both of those.
And I feel like I want a little bit, like on this, there's a little part of the rock there that I want a little bit more shadow on, and then it will make the sun, make that reflection make a little more sense. Okay, now because I have these ripples in here, I feel like I need some more ripples. And again, I'm going to dry this because I don't want unintentional blooms, and I can feel that's still kind of wet under there. I'm excited to take the tape off of this one. I taped it on all 4 sides.
I see that. Oh, excuse me.
And I think I don't want to use this big brush because it's too big. I don't want to have such big brush strokes, but I really don't like using my other mimics on there just because I don't want to risk damaging the tips. So I think I'm going to go with this Mimic Kalinsky just because, first of all, it's not as pointy. The bristles are a little bit stiffer and more resilient, so I don't think it's going to harm these brushes at all. Not that I really think your paper is going to harm it, but I think it's worth noting just because our brushes are expensive. This paper is kind of expensive. And rough paper looks really cool. I just don't want anyone to be like, well, I'm switching to everything rough now and then wreck all their brushes. So.
Alexandra Manga, how are you enjoying the Vivia colors? I'm super excited about that last haul video, and I'm bouncing, wanting to learn more.
I really like them. I've just done a few little sketches with them. They're super strong. So my challenge is getting used to kind of how strong they are. But I'm really enjoying them. I think what I'm probably going to enjoy most about them is actually coloring in stamped images because they're so transparent, and it's so easy just to like take a wet brush and get a little bit of, I mean, just barely touch it and you have enough pigment to like color a whole stamped image, and they fade out so beautifully that I just think it's going to be really nice for that sort of thing, more so than landscape painting like on location, which it's designed for portable painting, I think, to make portable painting affordable to more people, because I know the designer is from India, so I think that was her goal, to be able to bring more art to more people. I'm trying to paint around some cloud shapes here just so I get a little bit more reflection because I have that reflection there. But yeah, I think I'm still playing with them. It might be April. I don't want to release the video until people can actually get them. Ooh, there's something yucky on my paint. Probably from the bottom of my paint rinse water.
Have you changed that since last week, or is that still the old?
No, I changed it. I actually dumped it out when I was cleaning my office and destashing. I dumped out the paint and let the buckets dry even. I think it kicked up some interesting crumbs from the bottom because I never can get it completely clean. I don't have one of those fancy brushes you mentioned. I need to get one of those.
You can get them at the Dollar Tree.
Oh, really?
Yes, I've seen them at the Dollar Tree before.
Oh, I need to go to the Dollar Tree. I need to get some. They had some. I saw some really cute on somebody's haul. I should just not watch haul videos, but somebody had some really cute paper sorters. They were like these beautiful teal, like turquoisey blue paper sorters, and they were using them in their pantries to sort all kinds of good stuff. It was Do It on a Dime, I think, that I saw do that. I like her channel. But she had sorted all of her like pantry items into those really
I just
cute.
reorganized my pantry.
Nice. Nice.
I didn't buy anything to order, just kind of like went through. That's why I brought over that bag of candy to feed the children.
Candy for the children.
And reorganize stuff.
Yeah, I had recently reorganized my tea cupboard until that came in. Now my organization is
now you have
gone to pot. Completely gone to pot.
It's all John's fault because he insists on having all this tea that he likes, and he drinks like 3 tea bags out of the box and then doesn't touch them. And we don't like the same flavors.
Oh.
So I just got tired of moving them around and looking at them and seeing them take up valuable space. I'm also trying to cut back on the stuff in the pantry because John's going to be gone for 2 months.
Oh,
so I'm going to need a lot fewer. I'm not going to need as much in the cupboard.
Yeah, that's right.
Lisa Rogers, I found Daniel Smith watercolor ground transparent, but it only comes in 4 ounces. Does this product go a long way, or will I need to buy 2 at a time?
Let's see. I think it goes pretty far. I wouldn't buy 2 at a time just because I think that it might dry out. It's pretty thick. I use it for like rescuing illustrations. If I'm working on something and it needs to be redone, rather than having to repaint an entire thing, I can just basically take my paper back to white again, in just that certain part that needs to be reworked. But I have 16 ounce in the white, and I've barely made a dent in it. I'm almost worried every time I open it that it might be dried out. So I think they probably only have it small because you're not going to use up enough to go through a bigger one, and they don't want people to have it go hard on them and then be upset, I bet. Yeah, and like if you're ordering it on, online, even pretty much any place, you're going to get it within a couple of days. So if you see you're getting low and you're, using it like crazy, then order it. I wouldn't stock up on that. I think it's an acrylic based product too. So I'm very hesitant on stocking up on any acrylic based products because they have a shelf life. And what I'm kind of doing here with my reflections is I want to bring like a visual path through my painting, because I feel like I think that's what the painting was missing, and that's what I was having difficulty with, was there was no visual path. So with my reflections in the water, I can kind of guide the eye through this visual path. Even though it's not exactly what's going on in my reference photo, it's my world. I can do what I want to do.
I'm an adult. I can do what I want.
Yeah. This is a stiffer brush, so if you want more sparkle, you can actually dry brush a lot easier with it and bring out that quality. But I think that I'm pretty happy with this. I think that I'm going to call this done and take my tape off. So if you have any last minute questions, go ahead and ask them. I'm going to dry this real quick so I don't rip it when I take the tape off. But I will answer them. Then I'm going to get back to destashing something else. I need those bookshelves over there. The next on my list.
Oh yes, you got some books in there you could donate.
Yeah, I get
somewhere else.
Or I can get rid of my stuff. Jason will have to go through and choose his things, but I can get rid of what I don't need anymore.
Yeah, I say do it. Yay!
Or sweaters. We got sweaters to do.
Flannels.
It's like, and I have no sweatshirts. It's like there's been so many times I wish I had a sweatshirt just to like go on the treadmill or whatever, because I don't want to sweat in a sweater.
No.
And I don't have any sweatshirts, probably because I never buy sweatshirts, because I buy so many sweaters. I don't think of exercising when I'm shopping.
Well, who does?
I think of exercising so little. So this is on the rough paper. You can see the texture of it, I think, if I tip it up a little bit.
Now this would be a good one too if you wanted to play around with the salt.
Oh yeah, you could do that.
Like where kind of like the pebbles and stuff are, maybe.
Oh
like on
yeah,
the
right in
end,
here. That would be a great idea. Yeah, absolutely.
Throw it out there after you're done.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
You're all done. You're all done, Lindsay. Here's a good idea for that painting. I'm so helpful.
And this is a sketch. You can see it does have a more immediacy to it because I didn't like really sketch anything first. I just kind of slide down the paint. But the surface itself is not as interesting because it's so smooth for this particular application. If you were doing like a flower portrait, like a really close-up flower, this would be a much more appropriate surface because you'd be able to get a lot more of that detail. But when you're doing a landscape, you just get a much more interesting surface to work with, I think, when you're working with a rough paper. See if I can get those in there side by side. Not really together because they're too big, but you see the smooth and then the rough one we just did together. I was also a lot more choosy with my colors here. With my quick sketch, I just kind of charged in with lots of bright colors, and I tried to be a little more subtle with this one. So, so I hope you give this a try. I hope you enjoy it. And I guess any questions? Are we good?
Well, there were kind of a bunch that kind of all came through. So let me pop back up. Let's see if I can find it. Do you use Rebecca Vitagliano? Do you just use reference photos that have a lot of color in them, or do you figure out which colors to exchange for brighter colors? And if so, how do you decide which ones will work?
I do both. I think if I'm looking if I'm looking to find one reference photo that I can just paint from, if I'm not going from several, then I go for composition first. I look for composition and value differences. Color really isn't as important as the values. As long as you have the light and the dark right, it doesn't really matter. I could paint this in lime green and, you know, pink and yellow. It wouldn't, if I had the values right, then you can use any colors you want. A lot of times though, I will look and I will kind of up the saturation on colors. So if I see like a little hint of pink, I might really push that color. You have to do that a lot when you're painting things that are white or black. You have to really kind of look for any of those hints and really draw it out and emphasize them. Otherwise, it'll look just like a white spot or a black spot.
Tiffany Gray, negative painting is so hard for me. How can I improve?
Well, maybe just drawing something and painting around the object, and it's going to be kind of like probably like a technique thing where you're really working on your brush technique and your brush control, such as tipping it on its end like that when you want to get a fine detail, and using the side when you want a broad detail. Maybe look at some paintings you really like that make good use of the negative painting and try to copy that, or mask off your positive image. If you're not good at negative painting, just mask it off and just do a wash over the whole thing.
And Michelle King, when will your owl painting prints be ready?
Oh, I don't know.
Someday.
I'm sorry. I'm on this big book illustration project right now that has kind of pushed everything else to the wayside, unfortunately. Yeah, I've got too many irons in the fire. But when they are, I will let everybody know.
All right, that's we're all caught up.
All right, great. Yeah, if you want to keep up to date with different happenings, you can follow me here on YouTube. You can follow my blog, which is probably the best place because you can sign up for an email notification that will go right to your inbox. The sign up right on the side of my blog. Also on Facebook, if that's what you like. Or Instagram. Instagram is more of just like a random behind the scenes works in progress or stuff that's coming up soon. But you can follow on any one or all of them if you'd like to. That would be fantastic. Thank you so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up before you go, and happy crafting.